One of the most potent accounts of this incident came from Zachary Bailey, 1721 to 1769, considered one of the 10 wealthiest Jamaicans in the 18th century, and who owned over 2,000 slaves at the time of his death. Bailey was a planter, politician, and the owner of Bailey's Vale, Brimmer Hall, Nonsuch, Trinity, Trial and Unity plantations, as well as 3,000 acres in cattle pens, and who was present at the time of the revolt, but somehow managed to survive the assault and tell the tale, wrote, "A more dangerous or troublesome affair I was never engaged in all my life." Accounts state that Zachary was beside himself at the destruction he gazed upon once the revolters had moved on, and vowed revenge on those responsible, and quickly became a key player in the organizational efforts of the militia that responded to the uprising. Tackey's campaign incited uprisings on estates in the parishes of Westmoreland, St. Thomas in the east, Clarendon, St. John, and St. Dorothy's, both now a part of St. Catherine. On the 12th of April, the militia under Captain Rigby and Lieutenant Forsyth arrived at Downs Cove, in St. Mary, where Tackey and his insurgents had just destroyed houses and a host of other properties belonging to settlers. Forsyth was met by Charles Swiggle, a contingent of black soldiers and Charlestown Maroons, who were still called Crawfordstown Maroons by the colonial writers at the time. Accounts claim that Tackey's men attacked Forsyth's contingent and killed a number of white soldiers, while losing only 3 freed slave rebels in the process. It was reported that Tackey himself was wounded in said assault but managed to escape capture at that moment, fleeing into the woods for refuge. According to most accounts, it was Captain William Hines and his Black Regiment, alongside Swiggle and the Charlestown Maroons, who went in pursuit of Tackey through the forested mountains, catching up and eventually defeating Tackey's men in a skirmish, while taking the rest that were still alive captive. A day later, April 13th, the Maroons continued their pursuit of Tackey's men through the wooded areas near Friendship Estate in St. Mary. There it is said that the Maroons came across an Obeah man who had proclaimed that he could not die, and who they thought was protecting Tackey through witchcraft. The militia not only captured him, but after torture, killed and hung with his mask, ornaments of teeth, bones, and feather trimmings, at a prominent place in the vicinity, visible from almost any encampment. With this occurrence, many of the insurrectionist confidence was shaken, and within days, many were slowly and reluctantly returning to their plantations begging for mercy. Tackey, however, saw it different, and according to oral history, half-heartedly agreed to fight on, with reportedly only about 25 men willing to stand by his side. On the 14th of April, other Maroon parties from Scots Hall and Moortown joined the Charlestown Maroons, and led by Swiggle, engaged Tackey and his loyalist in Rocky Valley, causing them to retreat into the nearby woods. The Maroons gave chase, and according to reports, Tackey was cut down, shot and killed, while running at full speed by legendary Maroons marksman, Captain Davy, who it is said, proceeded to cut off Tackey's head as evidence of his feat, for which it was said, he would have been greatly rewarded. The rest of Tackey's men were said to have been found in a cave near a waterfall in St. Mary, now known as Tackey Falls, having all committed suicide rather than going back to slavery. Tackey's head was later displayed on a pole in Spanish Town until it is believed one of his followers took it down in the middle of the night and buried it. In the aftermath of Tackey's revolt, many of those captured or who had returned to their plantations were either flogged with great passion or hanged without ceremony, judge or jury, and left on display in many cases, as tools of discouraging future incidents of such a nature. In May and June of the same year, a number of Tackey's men, who had surrendered, were executed after trials in Spanish Town and Kingston. One rebel named Anthony was hanged, while another named Quaker was burnt at the stake, while 2 others were hung up in chains and starved to death. In total, over 400 rebels were executed and about 600 sent to be enslaved workers in the Bay of Honduras, for their participation in the revolt. According to reports at the time, the suppression of the uprisings came with a hefty price tag of an estimated £15,000, with property loss estimated to have been in the region £100,000. As a result of Tackey's rebellion, the Lieutenant Governor petitioned the King to increase the number of regular troops in Jamaica, stating that the forces in this island were with great difficulty capable of reducing the rebellions. It was also proposed that, given their leading role in revolts, a bill should be passed to impose prohibitions on the number of enslaved Coromantee people entering Jamaica. However, with such great demand for capable labor from the Gold Coast, no such legislation was ever enacted. The revolts did not end there, as other rebellions broke out all over Jamaica, and in almost all cases, they were suppressed by, or with the assistance of, the Maroons. In July of the same year, another revolt in St. Thomas was also crushed by a Maroon party led by Swiggle. It is reported that they killed one leader of the uprising by the name of Pompey, while the other, Akeem, hanged himself, in order to avoid both slavery and capture. Another incident occurred in April of the same year, and although not as familiar as the Taki incident, with it beginning on the 7th of April, 1760, and lasting until October of the following year, its duration has caused many historians to argue that Apongo's rebellion in western Jamaica was more significant than Taki's uprising in St. Mary. Under the leadership of a rebel slave named Wager or Apongo, who was said to have been a prince in Guinea, 8 plantations in Westmoreland and 2 in the parish of Hanover were attacked and nearly destroyed, leaving a large number of white settlers injured, bloodied or dead. It is said that Apongo had been a military leader in West Africa before being captured and brought to Jamaica as a slave. His enslaver, planter and naval officer, Arthur Forrest, was given command of HMS Wager during this time, and consequently renamed Apongo, Wager. Eventually, he was sent by his owner to work on a plantation in the parish of Westmoreland that he owned, from where it is believed he organized his rebellion. The Western Rebellion started when rebels under the command of Apongo rose up in revolt on the Maesmew Sugar Estate in Westmoreland. The rebels had timed their rebellion to coincide with the departure of a naval escort from the Bay of Blue Fields, a settlement in the parish of Westmoreland, which was named after Abraham Blauvelt, a Dutch Jewish pirate, privateer, and explorer of Central America and the Western Caribbean. Apongo assessment and timing were on point, because he had hoped that security would be less than normal with the naval departure, and he was correct, security was lacking. They overpowered the surprised British troops with ease, killing many and dispersing the rest. With this achieved, they then moved to set up barricades in order to resist the impending counterattacks, while encouraging others to join them. It was chaos as the attack and constant fighting caused many, both white and black, to flee to the Westmoreland capital of Savannah and surrounding ports in a bid to escape the carnage and bloodletting, as the militias organized counterattacks, which resulted in sporadic engagements that all ended in blood. Many of the revolters were captured and an even larger number killed, with many of the captured quickly executed without trial. On the 29th of May, 1760, an attempt by the Westmoreland militia to storm the rebels' barricaded encampment was soundly defeated and sent them retreating. An event which is said to have galvanized Apongo and his cohorts' control over the situation so much, they started gaining both support and more recruits daily. A development which is said to have been so demoralizing to the militia, who soon started to suffer from the significant number of desertions they were experiencing. With this development, Lieutenant Governor Henry Moore once again declared martial law. A company of the 74th Regiment, which was stationed at Savannah, and 2 detachments from Maroon towns, then joined the militia. Between June 1st and the 2nd, bolstered by militias from 2 more western parishes, a detachment of British soldiers and sailors from the colonial forces, alongside Maroon warriors from a Kampong town, achieved a successfully storming of the rebels' stranglehold, killing and capturing scores of runaways, resulting in them being driven from their safe haven, following a battle that was said to have lasted over 2 hours. One incident of horror recounts that during the battle, an untold number of African women and children, assumed to be a part of the rebellion, were driven over a steep precipice, falling to their deaths in the canyon below. In addition, many Africans were beaten, shot and killed, or taken captive and hastily executed. In the wake of the assault on the rebels' barricade, militia soldiers realized that the rebels, were prepared and well stocked in their attempts to resist militia counterattacks, with over 70 hogsheads of gunpowder at ready. They also found a mahogany chests full of clothes, ruffled shirts, laced hats, shoes, stockings, and cravats, among other basic necessities, which were obviously all commandeered along their pillaging and bloody rampage. However, overwhelming as this victory was, the colonial armies had difficulty making headway against the guerrilla warfare which smaller groups of Apongo's rebels were now employing. On June 5, it is said that British military commander, Robert Spragg, came to the realization that the only group that was able to follow up with the successes against the rebels were the Maroons, who he activated immediately and got results almost instantaneously. On the 6th of June, the very next day, under Maroon captains Furry of Trelawney Town and Akampongs Kwa Shi, more than dozen rebels were killed, and another 60 captured and brought to the Moreland estate in Manchester. But even with these results, the rebel slaves continued fighting for the rest of the year in western Jamaica, forcing then-Governor Sir Henry Moore, 1st Baronet, to continue imposing martial law in Westmoreland and surrounding areas. On June 7th, there were uprisings in the parish of St James and Hanover, but the attempts by the rebels to take the plantation of Glasgow were repelled by the planters, white employees, armed sailors, and loyal slaves. Furry and his Trelawney Maroons then ambushed the rebels in their bid to escape, killing several, even though most were said to have escaped. On the 10th of June, on the outskirts of the Mesopotamia estate, located in the parish of Westmoreland, and owned by Joseph Foster Barham, English politician, merchant and plantation owner, a detachment of soldiers and militia defeated a band of rebel slaves, killing about 40 and capturing another 50. On the 20th of June, the militias reportedly killed and captured 100 rebel slaves in Westmoreland, and on the 22nd of June, executed one of the rebel slaves after a very speedy trial for the murder of 2 white children, and with conviction quick, he was burnt alive the same day. That very same day, another uprising in St James was thwarted, and more than 60 Africans captured, most of who were also speedily executed. But even with all these efforts, slaves continued to escape into the cockpit country, where they united with Apongos rebels. Several of these groups moved between the mountains and forests to escape hunting bands of militia and Maroons troops. Facing defeat, many of the rebels committed suicide rather than be enslaved. Militia reports boasts of about 700 rebels being killed in the Western conflict alone, and made constant references to the persistent stench of death emanating from nearby woods, where numerous hanging bodies of African men, women, and children became commonplace. With the constant reinforcement of the militia, the rebels became disheartened, made mistakes, got captured, and eventually started surrendering on what seemed like a daily basis. As fate would have it, Apongo and one of his main lieutenants were eventually captured by the militia on the 3rd of July, 1760. Their judgment was quick, with both being sentenced to death within days of capture. Davy, who was identified as one of the key players in the whole fiasco, was executed by being put in the gibbets, a gallows-type structure from which the dead or dying bodies of criminals were hanged from, to starve to death, which took a week to reach its conclusion. Apongo was hung up in chains for 3 days, after which he was to be taken down and burnt to death, according to the sentence which had been handed down. However, Apongo died in his cage within the 3 days, escaping the final portion of his sentence. From all indicators and accounts, the revolts led by Taki and Apongo continued to serve as inspirations towards uprisings during the 1760s and beyond. In 1765, an uprising in St. Mary resulted in enslaved Africans setting the Whitehall estate of Zachary Bailey on fire. The revolt was led by a man known as a Bruco, who was given the slave name of Blackwall, and who had been acquitted for his role in Taki's revolt of 1760 due to lack of evidence. In this incident, several white plantation workers were killed. It is said that Bailey himself led his militia against these rebels, killing several of them, before most had the opportunity to even commit suicide. Abruco was one of those caught, and while other rebels were hanged or transported and resold, he wasn't so fortunate. Instead, he was condemned to be burnt alive. In October of 1766, another rebellion took place in the parish of Westmoreland, also said to have been inspired by Taki's revolt. It is documented that in this incident, Akan slaves numbering in probably their 30s rose up in revolt, killing 19 white settlers, before their insurrection was brutally suppressed by British militia and a band of Maroons. Many, however, escaped the militia, but were hunted for weeks until caught, convicted, and all sentenced to be burnt alive.